Paco was a mule unlike any other, with a strong back, a gentle gaze, and a steadfast dedication that endeared him to everyone at the remote countryside clinic where he worked. Day in and day out, Paco carried supplies along narrow, winding paths that led through grassy meadows and dense woods, his sturdy hooves unyielding against the rocky trails. His days were filled with routine, yet he seemed to find meaning in every load he bore, every step he took alongside the people he served. Paco's calm, attentive demeanor made him a trusted companion, not just for his handlers, but for the patients who often paused to pat his neck or scratch behind his ears. Those who spent time with Paco often claimed he had an uncanny way of sensing when someone needed comfort. A nuzzle, a gentle flick of his ears, or a quiet presence that seemed to say, "You're not alone." Martha had known Paco for many years. She was a retired nurse with a soft voice, kind eyes, and a patience honed over decades of caring for others. Martha had chosen to volunteer her time at a high-end hospital known for its focus on holistic therapies, blending modern medicine with approaches meant to soothe the body and soul. Children, especially those facing dire illnesses or recovering from traumatic injuries, found solace in Martha's care. She'd seen to countless young patients, offering a steady hand and a warm smile through treatments and therapies that tested the limits of endurance. Though her years had given her wrinkles and slowed her step, Martha's spirit remained as vital as ever, and she poured her heart into every moment spent at the hospital. Early spring had settled over the countryside, bringing with it fresh breezes and budding blossoms. Sunlight streamed through tall windows of hospital, casting gentle patterns on polished floors. The scent of new flowers mingled with antiseptic, a curious mix that spoke of life pressing forward despite the weight of illness. Birds chirped outside, their melodies muffled by glass but unmistakable, adding to the tranquility. On this particular sunny afternoon, Martha stood by Paco's side as they completed a familiar ritual, unloading supplies the mule had carried to the hospital. He bore small, well-organized loads that included everything from linens to basic medical supplies. But Paco's role extended beyond mere transportation. His presence seemed to calm anxious parents waiting for updates on their children, and he delighted many patients who reached out with tentative hands, finding reassurance in his warmth. Paco's day-to-day duties typically unfolded with predictable steadiness. He would wait patiently as Martha and other volunteers guided him, pausing whenever someone approached. Today, however, was different. As Martha gently lifted the last of the supplies, she noticed Paco's ears twitching. His large brown eyes were fixed on the end of the hallway, his nostrils flaring as if catching an unfamiliar scent. He shifted, an almost imperceptible movement, but Martha felt it, a signal that something had drawn his attention. She followed his gaze and saw nothing out of the ordinary, just a series of closed doors leading to patients' rooms. Yet Paco's focus did not waver. He took a step forward, and then another, the leather straps of his harness creaking softly as he moved. Martha's brows furrowed in curiosity. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, running a hand along Paco's neck. He didn't respond in any typical way. Instead, he walked slowly toward one of the rooms, as if led by a force unseen but deeply felt. Martha, now more intrigued than concerned, followed, her shoes making soft taps against the floor. The room's door was ajar, revealing a small figure lying motionless on a bed. Machines hummed quietly, monitoring every breath, every beat of a young heart. This was Alex's room, a child many knew and hoped would wake. He had been in a coma for months, the result of a tragic accident. Flowers, cards, and bright drawings adorned the walls, sent by family and friends who refused to give up hope. Paco halted just outside Alex's door. His ears pricked forward, and he let out a deep, slow breath. Martha watched as he stretched his neck, nostrils flaring again. Something about Alex had captured the mule's attention in a way she'd never seen. She placed a gentle hand on Paco's neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his pulse beneath her fingertips. Was it possible he sensed something about the boy? Martha shook her head, reminding herself not to let her emotions carry her away. Yet Paco's behavior stirred something in her, a mix of wonder and a glimmer of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. "Come on, Paco," she said softly, but the mule stayed rooted in place, his eyes fixed on Alex. It was as if he was waiting for something, though neither Martha nor anyone else could say what. The hallway, typically bustling with activity, felt suddenly still. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, a quiet that spoke of the weight of countless unspoken wishes. Martha stood just behind Paco, her curiosity mounting. She'd seen the mule respond to people's emotions in subtle ways before, but this was different. Paco's fixation on Alex's room had an intensity she couldn't ignore. With a gentle pull on the lead rope, she tried to coax him away. "Come on, Paco," she murmured, but he remained still, his eyes locked on the boy's small figure inside the room. The air felt heavy, as if it were holding its breath, and Martha sensed that there was no use in insisting. Instead, she decided to follow Paco's lead, her heart beating a little faster. Inside Alex's room, machines beeped softly, maintaining their rhythmic vigil over the boy's life. The sunlight, filtered through thin curtains, painted delicate patterns across the walls. Alex's face was pale but peaceful, framed by tousled hair that looked almost too bright against the hospital's sterile sheets. Martha walked quietly to his bedside, Paco stepping slowly behind her. She glanced at the monitors and then back at the mule, who now stood inches away from Alex. Paco's ears twitched as he lowered his head, nostrils flaring as he drew in the scents around him. Then, with a gentleness that belied his size, he extended his neck and touched the back of Alex's hand with his nose. The contact was brief, but it sent a ripple through the room. Martha caught her breath, unsure of what she'd just witnessed. Paco remained still, his large eyes soft and watchful. To anyone else, it might have seemed like nothing more than an animal's curiosity, but Martha had learned to trust Paco's instincts. She reached out, placing her own hand atop Alex's, feeling the coolness of his skin against her palm. "I don't know what you're sensing, Paco," she whispered, "but maybe we should listen." Martha's thoughts drifted back to other moments when Paco's intuition had surprised her. There was the time he stood by a grieving parent, unmoving, offering quiet comfort without prompting. Or when he seemed to detect the anxiety of a young girl undergoing painful treatments, patiently allowing her to braid his mane for hours. Paco had a gift, though she'd never fully understood it. His presence calmed people, grounded them. It was why she'd agreed to bring him here as part of the hospital's outreach program. But this was different. The way he focused on Alex felt deeper, more insistent, as if there was a connection she couldn't yet comprehend. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. The door opened, and Timothy stepped inside, a tray of supplies balanced carefully in his hands. Timothy was a fellow volunteer, a younger man with a kind smile and a deep commitment to helping the children in their care. He paused, eyes widening at the sight of Paco so close to Alex's bed. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low, but edged with surprise. Martha offered a small shrug. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. Paco wouldn't move. He seems drawn to Alex. Timothy set the tray down, his gaze flicking between the mule and the boy. He'd seen Paco interact with patients before, but never quite like this. "That's different," he said softly, taking a step closer. Together, they watched as Paco remained by Alex's side, his head lowered in quiet observation. It was as if the mule had settled in for a vigil of his own. The hospital's routine went on around them. Footsteps in the hallway, voices calling out orders, the faint squeak of wheels on polished floors. But in this room, time seemed to slow. Timothy's expression shifted, curiosity giving way to cautious hope. "Do you think it's doing anything?" he asked, gesturing at Paco's proximity. Martha shook her head. "I don't know, but maybe it's worth finding out." The idea of Paco being allowed so close to a patient, especially one as fragile as Alex, was unconventional, to say the least. Hospital rules were strict, designed to minimize any risks. Bringing an animal inside a sterile environment required special permissions, and even then, interactions were typically limited. Timothy voiced the unspoken concern. "I'm not sure they'll let this continue. You know how the board feels about untested therapies." Martha nodded. The thought had already crossed her mind. Yet, as she watched Paco's unwavering focus on Alex, she felt a quiet determination take root. She would find a way. Over the next few days, she and Timothy worked to secure permission for Paco to enter Alex's room under controlled conditions. It wasn't easy. The hospital staff was divided. Some saw promise in the mule's calming influence, while others feared it was a distraction or, worse, a source of false hope. Meetings were held. Debates ensued. Martha presented evidence of animal-assisted therapies aiding recovery, but it was a hard sell. The stakes were high. No one wanted to upset Alex's family or risk his fragile condition. Finally, permission was granted, though with strict stipulations. Paco could visit, but every session would be monitored closely. If there were any signs of distress, the visits would stop immediately. Martha and Timothy prepared carefully, ensuring that Paco's presence posed no risk. When the day came for the first official visit, tension hung thick in the air. Martha led Paco into Alex's room, her grip firm but gentle. Every step felt significant. Paco moved with remarkable care, as if he understood the gravity of his task. He approached Alex's bed slowly, lowering his head once more. The room fell silent. Timothy watched, his breath held. Paco leaned forward, his nose brushing Alex's hand again. Martha's eyes were fixed on the boy's face. Was it her imagination, or did his fingers twitch, ever so slightly? She glanced at Timothy, who met her gaze, his own eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and hope. Neither spoke, but in that moment, they both knew something had shifted. Paco had become more than a mule delivering supplies. He was a catalyst for something they could barely grasp. The visits continued. Each time, Paco's presence seemed to draw something out, even if it was only the faintest flicker of movement or a change in Alex's breathing. Martha documented every session, determined to prove that this connection was real, that it mattered. Doubts lingered among the staff, but with each passing day, hope grew a little stronger. And always, Paco was there, patient, steadfast, his gaze never wavering. The days following Paco's first official visit to Alex were marked by a quiet, persistent hope. Word of the mule's interactions with the comatose boy spread throughout the hospital. While some staff remained skeptical, dismissing Paco's behavior as mere coincidence or wishful thinking, others could not ignore the faint signs of change. Martha, now more committed than ever, established a routine for Paco's visits. Each afternoon, she would lead him into Alex's room, pausing for a moment by the door before they approached the boy's bed. Paco would lower his head, his movements deliberate and slow, and touch Alex's hand or lay his muzzle gently near the boy's arm. Every touch felt significant, as if Paco understood the fragile life before him. The hospital staff was divided. Some nurses and doctors openly supported Martha's efforts, intrigued by the possibility that the mule's presence could spark a change in Alex's condition. Others, however, feared raising false hope for the boy's parents, who visited daily and spoke to their son as if he might wake at any moment. One evening, as Martha prepared for another visit, she overheard a heated discussion between two doctors in the hallway. "We're treading on thin ice," one said, his voice low but firm. "Allowing an animal in a critical care room, it's dangerous, unproven." The other doctor countered, "But what if it's helping? We owe it to Alex to try." Martha felt the weight of their words. She knew there was no guarantee Paco's visits would lead to any measurable improvement, but her instincts told her it was worth the risk. Timothy stood by her side as a staunch ally. Together, they documented every change, slight shifts in Alex's breathing, faint twitches of his fingers, or the occasional flutter of his eyelids. Nothing was definitive, yet each moment offered a sliver of hope. The pressure on Martha to prove the legitimacy of Paco's presence grew daily. She found herself defending the mule's visits in meetings with hospital administrators, emphasizing the documented benefits of animal-assisted therapy. But the skeptics were relentless. Hope can be dangerous, one board member said. It can destroy people when it's false. Despite the mounting tension, Martha refused to back down. Paco's visits continued, and over time, she noticed a pattern in Alex's responses. Whenever the mule approached, Alex's vital signs would shift. A slightly stronger heartbeat, a deeper breath. It wasn't much, but it was real. Determined to better understand, Martha began to read about animal behavior and their interactions with humans. She discovered that mules like Paco could sense subtle changes in human emotions and physical states. While it wasn't a proven science, there were stories of animals detecting illnesses or offering comfort in ways people couldn't fully explain. This gave her hope and provided a rational explanation to share with the doubters. The main conflict emerged during a staff meeting called to discuss Paco's future at the hospital. Emotions ran high as doctors, nurses, and administrators debated the risks and rewards of allowing an animal in a clinical setting. Martha spoke passionately about the small but tangible changes she had seen. Paco isn't a miracle worker, she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. But he offers something we can't quantify, connection, comfort. And maybe that's exactly what Alex needs. Her words hung in the air, met with a mix of nods and furrowed brows. The first major challenge arose when Alex's parents, weary from months of watching their son remain unresponsive, expressed doubts. They were grateful for every effort made on Alex's behalf, but feared that focusing on Paco might distract from other, more established treatments. Martha and Timothy met with them privately, explaining the mule's gentle visits and the subtle changes they'd noticed. It was a difficult conversation, filled with tears and uncertainty. "We don't want false hope," Alex's mother said, her voice breaking. "But we'll do anything if it means he has a chance." In the end, they agreed to let the visits continue, but only under close supervision. As days turned into weeks, the relationship between Paco and Alex deepened. Paco seemed to sense when Alex was having a particularly rough day. His movements would become slower, his breaths measured, as if offering a quiet strength. Martha marveled at the mule's dedication. She too adapted, learning to read Paco's cues and adjusting their visits to suit Alex's condition. The bond they shared was unlike anything she had seen. It was quiet, subtle, but profoundly moving. One afternoon, as Paco stood by Alex's side, a loud crash echoed down the hallway, a dropped tray of medical instruments. Paco startled, his ears flicking back, his muscles tensing. Martha's heart leapt into her throat as she placed a calming hand on his neck. "Easy, Paco," she whispered, willing the mule to stay calm. For a brief, terrifying moment, it seemed he might bolt or react unpredictably. But then, slowly, he lowered his head again, his attention returning to Alex. The tension in the room eased, but the incident underscored the fragility of their situation. If anything went wrong, Paco's visits could be stopped for good. Despite the lingering doubts and the challenges that lay ahead, Martha continued to believe in Paco's purpose. She and Timothy worked tirelessly to create a safe and supportive environment for each visit. More staff members began to observe, some still skeptical, but others starting to believe in the possibility of connection and healing. It wasn't about miracles. It was about small steps, quiet moments, and the hope that even the faintest spark could grow into something more. The debate over Paco's place in Alex's care reached a tipping point one rainy afternoon. A visiting relative, Alex's uncle, voiced his doubts loudly during a family meeting. "What if this mule's presence makes no difference? What if it sets us back?" he demanded, his words echoing through the hall. The hospital administrators had gathered to reassess their decision, with voices raised and opinions polarized. For Martha, it felt like a knife twisting in an already fragile hope. She knew they were under scrutiny. Allowing an animal to continue therapy with such an uncertain outcome was a risk the hospital couldn't take lightly. Stakes rose further as word of Paco's visits reached beyond hospital walls. Local news outlets picked up on the story, framing it as both a touching experiment and a potential overreach in patient care. Reporters lingered near the hospital entrance, asking probing questions about Paco's presence. The public reaction was a mix of fascination and skepticism. Some people supported the unconventional therapy, sharing stories of animals' impacts on their own health. Others worried it was a distraction from established medical treatments. The mounting pressure pushed hospital leaders to consider ending the sessions. "We must tread carefully," the head administrator said. "This isn't just about one boy. It's about our reputation and trust." Faced with this external scrutiny and the possibility of Paco's visits being permanently halted, Martha knew she had to fight harder. She spent hours compiling notes on every small change in Alex's condition since Paco's involvement, details that others might overlook. Subtle shifts in muscle tone, the depth of his breathing, and moments when his eyes seemed to respond to light were carefully documented. Timothy helped, taking turns observing sessions and ensuring every moment was recorded. Together, they made their case. "Hope isn't just an abstract concept," Martha said in a meeting, her voice steady despite the anxiety coursing through her. "Sometimes it's a lifeline," but not everyone was convinced. The hospital's chief medical officer, a stern man who valued evidence above all else, remained a major obstacle. "We need proof, not stories," he said. "The human body doesn't wake because of sentiment alone." Martha took his words to heart, but refused to be deterred. Her belief in Paco's impact was unshakable. She began working with therapists who specialized in animal-assisted care, gathering more data to support their efforts. Slowly, she began to see small cracks in the wall of skepticism. The tension came to a peak one morning when Martha, Timothy, and a small group of staff gathered for a pivotal session. The room was prepared with extra care, floors scrubbed, monitoring equipment checked and rechecked. Paco was led in, his hooves making soft sounds against the floor. The boy's parents sat quietly, their eyes heavy with exhaustion and guarded hope. This time felt different, as if everything hung on what might happen next. Paco approached the bed slowly, his nostrils flaring as he drew close to Alex. Martha held her breath, aware of every movement in the room. The mule lowered his head, his muzzle gently brushing against Alex's hand. Silence filled the space, stretching unbearably. Then, something happened, a faint twitch in Alex's fingers. It was small, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Gasps echoed through the room. Tears streamed down Alex's mother's face as she leaned forward, calling her son's name. The staff exchanged glances, a mixture of shock and cautious joy. Timothy whispered, "Did we just see that?" Martha nodded, her eyes shimmering. The significance of the moment was clear. Paco had somehow reached through the barrier that separated Alex from the world around him. This peak emotional scene became a turning point. The hospital's stance on animal-assisted therapy began to shift, albeit slowly. More staff members expressed interest, and a few even sought out additional training in animal care. The initial disbelief started to give way to a cautious acknowledgement that perhaps Paco's presence was having a meaningful impact. Yet not everyone was swayed. Alex's uncle remained adamant that focusing too much on Paco would delay other critical treatments. "We can't hinge everything on this," he argued during a tense meeting. "What if it's a coincidence?" Martha understood his fears. She, too, grappled with doubt during quiet moments alone. But each time she looked at Paco standing steadfastly by Alex's side, her resolve strengthened. "Sometimes, what we need most isn't the answer we expect," she said quietly, knowing that not everyone would understand. As the hospital faced growing public scrutiny, she began reaching out to experts in animal therapy, seeking their advice on how to best demonstrate the efficacy of their work. It was an uphill battle, but Martha had never been one to shy away from difficult paths. Paco's visits continued under stricter protocols. Observers watched every interaction, jotting down notes and measuring Alex's responses. The sessions became less about hope and more about hard evidence. This scrutiny was both a challenge and a blessing. It meant more eyes were on Alex, and every moment Paco spent in the room was now carefully analyzed. Tension hung heavy, but for Martha and Timothy, it was worth every breathless second. One afternoon, during a visit, Paco rested his head beside Alex for longer than usual. Martha watched, her hands clasped tightly. Minutes passed, then a movement. Alex's hand lifted slightly, as if responding to a presence it hadn't recognized before. The room erupted with a mix of disbelief and joy. It was more than a flicker. It was a sign, fragile but real. From that moment, the hospital's cautious support turned to genuine belief. Paco's role was not just symbolic, it was meaningful. The breakthrough moment when Alex's hand lifted had a ripple effect across the hospital. What had begun as cautious support for Paco's visits turned into genuine belief. For the first time in months, Alex's parents dared to hope, and the staff, once divided, rallied around Martha's efforts. Paco's continued presence became a symbol of quiet perseverance. Each day, Martha led him into the room, their visits now observed by not just medical staff, but visiting specialists and curious onlookers. The air was charged with anticipation. Every interaction between Paco and Alex weighed with significance. Martha reflected often on how much had changed. She remembered the uncertainty of their first visits, the skeptical glances, and whispered doubts. Now, Paco was a daily fixture at the hospital, his calm demeanor and gentle touch bringing a quiet strength to Alex's room. It wasn't just Alex who benefited. Other patients seemed to respond positively when Paco passed through the halls, offering a moment of relief or a smile. Martha saw how one mule had managed to bridge the divide between hope and reality, and it filled her with a deep sense of gratitude. But progress was slow. Despite moments of connection, Alex's recovery was not guaranteed. Martha knew that for every small movement, there would be long stretches of uncertainty. She and Timothy continued their meticulous documentation, noting every twitch of Alex's fingers, every change in his breathing pattern. The hospital's administrators, while supportive, remained cautious. "We need measurable progress," they reminded Martha. One sign isn't enough. The pressure weighed heavily, but Martha's resolve never wavered. She had come too far to turn back. As spring gave way to early summer, Paco's visits became part of the hospital's routine. There were days when Alex seemed more responsive, his eyelids fluttering or his hand gripping slightly when touched. On other days, there was no change at all, and doubt crept in like a cold wind. Martha, sitting quietly by Alex's side, often spoke to him as Paco stood watch. "You're not alone," she would whisper, her voice soft but steady. "We're right here." The hospital administrators set a deadline. If no significant improvement was seen within a month, Paco's visits would be re-evaluated. It was a harsh reminder of the stakes involved. Martha spent sleepless nights reviewing her notes, praying for a sign that Paco's presence was making a difference. Timothy offered support, his unwavering belief in their work keeping her grounded. Together, they fought to prove that every small change mattered. "We can't give up now," Timothy said during one late-night conversation. "Alex needs us. Paco needs us." In the final week before the deadline, tension reached its peak. Martha led Paco into Alex's room, her heart heavy with the weight of their last chance. The room was filled with observers, doctors, nurses, administrators, and Alex's parents. Paco stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. He lowered his head, his muzzle brushing against Alex's hand as it had countless times before. Everyone held their breath. Minutes passed, each second stretching unbearably. And then, a miracle, a small, deliberate squeeze of Alex's hand around Paco's nose. It was unmistakable, a movement that left no room for doubt. The room erupted in emotion. Alex's mother sobbed, clutching her husband's arm. The staff exchanged glances of astonishment and joy. Martha felt tears streaming down her face. She reached for Alex's hand, feeling its warmth, its life. "You did it," she whispered to Paco, her voice thick with emotion. "You really did it." From that moment, the hospital's approach to animal-assisted therapy changed. Paco became more than a mule delivering supplies. He became a symbol of hope and resilience. The administrators who once doubted now spoke openly about the importance of alternative therapies. Martha continued her work, not just with Paco but with other animals, helping to create a program that would reach countless patients. Timothy remained by her side, their bond strengthened by the journey they had shared. Alex's recovery was slow but steady. He began to respond more during Paco's visits, and over time, he opened his eyes. The road ahead was long, filled with challenges and uncertainties, but each day brought new milestones. Paco continued his visits, always by Alex's side, a gentle reminder of the power of connection and perseverance. The boy's parents, who once feared false hope, now embraced the small victories, celebrating each sign of progress with quiet joy. Martha often found herself reflecting on everything they had overcome. She thought of Paco's steadfastness, his ability to sense what others could not, and the way he brought people together. It was a lesson in patience, in faith, and in the simple power of being present. In a world that often demanded immediate results, Paco had shown that sometimes the smallest gestures carried the greatest weight. One evening, as the sun set over the hospital grounds, Martha stood beside Paco, watching as Alex, now awake and smiling, interacted with a group of children. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered joy, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the quiet strength of a mule who refused to give up. Martha leaned down, resting a hand on Paco's neck. "Thank you," she whispered. The mule's ears flicked, as if he understood. Together, they watched the children play, their laughter filling the air, and for a moment, everything felt right.